The human soldier had never imagined that one day he would find himself on the other side of a battlefield, lying on the ground, surrounded by smoke, fire, and the echoes of an alien war. The sky above was a strange mix of dark red and black, streaked with flashes of energy weapons and explosions that lit up the landscape like a deadly fireworks show. He had been trained for combat, trained for survival, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment when the ground beneath him trembled, and alien soldiers surrounded him, weapons aimed, ready to capture him alive. He had fought bravely, dodging laser blasts, diving behind crumbling walls, and countering attacks with whatever was at hand. But the aliens were too many, too fast, and far too organized. One moment he had been running, heart pounding, determined not to fall. The next he had been grabbed, lifted roughly off the ground and thrown into a strange, hovering alien transport. The inside of the ship was cold and dark, with walls that seemed to hum with energy. He could hear the muffled sounds of the battle outside, the screams, the explosions, the chaos. But here, it was eerily quiet, except for the quiet whirring of the ship's engines. The humans he had been fighting alongside were gone, either killed or captured, and he was now completely alone, a prisoner of a race that saw him as nothing more than a human to be controlled. He had seen prisoners before, in training exercises or on screens during briefings, but now he was living it. His hands were tied and heavy restraints bit into his wrists and ankles. His heart pounded in his chest, not just from fear but from frustration. He hated feeling helpless. He hated the thought of being at someone else's mercy. And yet as he was dragged through corridors of steel and glowing alien symbols, he forced himself to remain calm. Panic would only make things worse. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, the ship landed with a heavy thud. The human was dragged out, still bound, into a large chamber that smelled of smoke, ash, and something else, something primal and terrifying. The air was hot, thick, and heavy, and the floor trembled under his feet. Before him stood a massive doorway, guarded by creatures that were humanoid in shape but alien in every way, tall, with elongated limbs, and eyes that glowed with a cold intelligence. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The human already understood the message in their silence. This was no ordinary prison. The guard shoved him forward. The heavy doors groaned as they opened, revealing a space unlike anything he had ever seen. It was enormous, a cavern carved into rock and metal, illuminated by flickering red and orange light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The heat hit him first. It was suffocating, as if the air itself was alive, pressing down on him, warning him to stay back. And then he saw it. A massive creature larger than any animal he had ever encountered rose from the shadows. Its scales shimmered like molten metal, and its eyes glowed with a dangerous, intelligent light. Its wings were folded but still massive enough to block half the room, and its claws scraped against the floor with a sound that made his stomach tighten. The dragon was alive with power, every muscle moving with the grace of a predator that knew it was the apex of its world. The human froze. He had seen combat. He had faced danger, but nothing in his experience compared to this. He had heard stories, legends whispered among soldiers of the alien's deadliest dragon, a creature so feared that no prisoner had ever returned from its cell, and now he was standing in front of it, completely unarmed, completely vulnerable. The dragon's eyes narrowed, scanning him from head to toe. Its nostrils flared and smoke hissed from its mouth. It made a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the floor and into his bones. The human forced himself to breathe steadily. He could feel his pulse racing, his palms sweaty, but he could not show fear, not fully. Somehow he had to find a way to survive. The alien stepped back, giving the human and the dragon a wide berth. They spoke among themselves in harsh, guttural tones, likely discussing what to do with him. The human couldn't understand them, but he didn't need to. Their intentions were clear. He was expected to die here. That was their plan. And yet, as the alien soldiers left, the dragon didn't attack immediately. It merely watched, tilting its massive head, smoke curling from its nostrils, eyes never leaving him. For a moment, the human considered what most people would in his position, running, screaming, pleading. But he was trapped, and he knew that any sudden movement could provoke the dragon. So he did the only thing he could do. He stood still, letting his eyes meet the dragon's as steadily as possible. He tried to appear calm, though inside every nerve screamed in panic. He studied the dragon closely, noticing the small details. The flick of its tail, the twitch of its ears, the way it shifted its weight. There was intelligence there, he realized, more than any ordinary beast. It wasn't just instinct. This creature understood. Hours passed, though he couldn't tell for certain. The human sat, watched, and learned. He observed the dragon pacing in its massive cell, noting how it reacted to light, sound, and the faint vibrations from the alien ship. He understood that brute force would not save him. Cunning, patience, and observation might. He began to memorize every detail of the space, every shadow, every potential escape point, though he knew the aliens had likely made escape impossible. Food and water came eventually, thrown into the cell by mechanical arms that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The human didn't eat immediately. Instead, he placed the food near the dragon and spoke softly, not expecting it to understand but needing to feel some small control over his fear. The dragon sniffed cautiously, then, much to his surprise, ate. It did not attack him. It did not roar or lunge. It simply ate, eyes still on him, alert, calculating. Night came, or what passed for night in the alien ship. The human slept in short bursts, never fully letting his guard down. Every sound made him tense, every shadow could be a threat. Yet amidst the fear, a strange thought began to form. The dragon was dangerous, yes, but it was not mindless. If he could survive, if he could understand it, perhaps he could live. Perhaps even he could find a way to turn the deadliest creature in the galaxy into an ally. He didn't know if it was madness or genius. All he knew was that he had survived this long by relying on his wits, his instincts, and his courage. And now, faced with the most terrifying creature he had ever seen, he realized that survival would require more than strength. It would require understanding, patience, and a willingness to see the dragon not as a monster, but as a being with its own mind, its own rules, and perhaps its own sense of judgment. For the first time since being captured, he felt a spark of hope. Not because he was safe, not because the aliens had failed, but because he understood something crucial. In the heart of the deadliest dragon, there was a mind, and a mind could be reasoned with. A beast could be tamed, not fully perhaps, but enough to survive. And if he could survive, he could fight another day. The human took a deep breath and settled into the corner of the massive cell, every sense alert, every muscle tense, but his mind clear. He would need every ounce of patience, every scrap of courage, and every bit of intelligence he possessed to survive the days to come. And though he did not yet know it, this was the first step toward a bond that would defy the expectations of both human and alien. A connection that could change the course of his life forever. The human had spent the first day in the dragon's cell mostly observing. By the second day, he realized he needed to do more than just survive. He needed to understand the creature he was up against. He could feel its power in every movement. The way the floor vibrated beneath its claws, the heat radiating from its body. But as terrifying as it was, the human noticed something else, something the aliens clearly overlooked. The dragon was curious. It was not attacking him, not yet. It was testing him, watching him, trying to figure out what kind of being he was. He began to move carefully, never making sudden gestures, never turning his back. He spoke softly in low tones, even though he doubted the dragon understood his words. The sound of his voice, calm and steady, seemed to pique the dragon's curiosity rather than trigger its aggression. Every time he spoke, it tilted its head, nostrils flaring, smoke curling from its mouth. It was as if the dragon was listening, considering, calculating. The human realized he had to take a risk. If he stayed frozen in fear, he would eventually die, either from the dragon or from the harsh conditions of the cell. Slowly, he reached toward the edge of the food the aliens had thrown in the day before, picking up a chunk of meat. He held it out carefully, not too close, not too fast. The dragon's massive eyes followed his every movement. For a tense moment, it stayed still, wings slightly raised, claws digging into the floor. Then, almost imperceptibly, it inched forward and sniffed the meat. The human held his breath. One wrong move could mean the end. The dragon's massive head lowered, and it took the food gently without striking him. Relief flooded through him, but he did not move. He continued to speak softly, letting the dragon see him as non-threatening. Over hours, small trust began to form, a fragile connection that neither fully understood yet. The human had never felt fear like this, but neither had he ever felt hope so strongly. He learned quickly that patience was key. The dragon reacted violently if he moved too quickly, but if he remained calm and steady, it seemed almost respectful. He observed the patterns of its behavior, the way it paced during the hottest part of the day, the way it favored certain areas of the cell, the subtle twitch of its tail when it was agitated or excited. These small observations became crucial for his survival. He began predicting the dragon's movements, stepping aside before it shifted, speaking softly when it made low growls, and sitting still when it watched him with piercing eyes. The human also had to survive physically. The cell was harsh. Heat radiated from the walls and floor, making it hard to breathe. Water and food were scarce and controlled by the alien's mechanical arms. He rationed carefully, eating only enough to maintain his strength. Each meal became an opportunity to observe and interact with the dragon. Sometimes he left portions near the creature, and each time, he noticed subtle changes, less suspicion in its gaze, slower, more relaxed movements, even occasional soft grunts that might have been sounds of acknowledgement. By the third day, he realized that he had to try more than observation. He had to test the limits of their fragile bond. He extended his hand slowly toward the dragon, careful to avoid eye contact that might be interpreted as a threat. The dragon froze, nostrils flaring, smoke curling from its mouth. The human remained completely still, holding his hand out, willing himself to stay calm. The dragon sniffed his fingers cautiously and then, to his astonishment, nudged them lightly with its snout. A thrill ran through him, mixed with disbelief. No human had survived this far in the dragon's cell before, and now, the creature that had been their executioner seemed to recognize him as different. But the human knew better than to celebrate. Trust could break in an instant. One wrong move, one sudden noise, and the dragon could destroy him instantly. He spent the rest of the day moving carefully, interacting minimally, observing every twitch of the tail, every flare of the nostrils, every shift of the wings. He began experimenting, leaving small offerings in different spots of the cell, speaking softly, watching for reactions. Each time the dragon took the food without aggression, his confidence grew. But he also noticed moments of irritation, the flick of a claw, a sudden glare, a low rumble. These were warnings. The human realized that the dragon was teaching him as much as he was teaching it. Every interaction was a lesson in patience, caution, and respect. The isolation of the cell was crushing, but it also gave him clarity. There were no distractions, no allies, no weapons, just him and the dragon. And for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to survive not through brute force but through intelligence, awareness, and connection. He felt a strange sense of companionship, even though the dragon was dangerous and unpredictable. He was not entirely alone. Over time, he noticed subtle shifts in the dragon's behavior. It began pacing less, sometimes sitting in one corner of the cell for long stretches, watching him with calm, almost contemplative eyes. It allowed him to move closer during meals, and even permitted him to clean his own wounds without aggression. These small signs told him that the dragon was not just intelligent, it was capable of recognizing patterns, of understanding intent and, in its own way, of respecting courage. The human also noticed that the dragon had its own routines. Certain times of day it would stretch its wings and flap them lightly, creating gusts that rattled the walls. Other times it would curl up in a corner, smoke hissing from its nostrils as if to claim its territory. The human learned to anticipate these actions, stepping aside when needed, speaking softly when it seemed agitated, and remaining completely still when it observed him. Every day became a careful dance of survival, a negotiation between two powerful beings. By the fifth day, the human felt a remarkable shift. The dragon no longer approached him with outright suspicion. It allowed him to sit closer, eat in its presence, and even make small gestures of offering food or water without immediate hostility. The human began speaking more confidently, explaining things to himself aloud, sometimes even giving the dragon a name in his mind. Though he knew the alien captors would never understand, he needed to humanize the creature, to see it not just as a monster but as a partner in survival. It was in these quiet moments that he discovered an important truth. The dragon's fearsome reputation was built on misunderstanding. The aliens had treated it as a tool, a weapon to terrify and control, rather than as a living, intelligent being with its own mind. The human recognized that if he could understand the dragon's thoughts, its instincts, and its emotions, he could survive, and perhaps even form an alliance that no other human had ever achieved. The human began speaking softly to the dragon about himself, telling it fragments of his past, his training, and his hopes of returning home. Though the dragon could not understand words as humans did, it responded to tone, rhythm, and confidence. Its eyes followed him closely, nostrils flaring less aggressively, wings relaxing slightly. The human felt a connection forming, fragile but undeniable. He realized that courage and empathy could reach even the most feared creature in the universe. By the end of the week, the human had achieved what no one believed possible. He could move freely within the cell, interact cautiously with the dragon, and remain unharmed. The bond was not complete, but trust was forming. The dragon had begun to see him not as prey, but as a being worthy of consideration, and the human had begun to understand that survival required more than strength. It required observation, patience, and respect for the other. The human looked around the massive cell, feeling the heat, sensing the vibrations, and noticing every shadow and flicker of light. He realized that the dragon was no ordinary monster. It was an intelligent, powerful, and dangerous being. But he also knew that he had learned its patterns, its moods, and its limits. He had survived where others had failed, and in doing so, he had planted the seeds of something extraordinary. A bond between human and dragon built not on fear, but on understanding and courage. As night fell, or the alien version of night, the human settled into a corner of the cell, body exhausted but mind alert. He felt a strange sense of anticipation. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring new challenges, new tests, but for the first time he felt that he might survive, that he might even gain the dragon's trust fully. And in that realization, a spark of hope ignited, a hope that survival was possible, and that this terrifying place might not be the end of his story, but the beginning of something far greater. By the next day, the human had begun to feel a strange familiarity with the dragon. What had started as terror had slowly shifted into cautious observation, and now he sensed something deeper, an unspoken acknowledgement between two beings who were powerful in very different ways. He had survived days in the dragon cell, not through brute force but through patience, calm, and careful understanding, and the dragon, the deadliest creature in the alien empire, was beginning to notice him too. He moved slowly across the massive cell, careful not to make sudden gestures that might trigger aggression. The dragon watched him with glowing eyes, its body tense but not attacking. Its wings twitched occasionally, creating small gusts that rattled the walls, but the human had learned to anticipate these movements. He could almost predict its every step now, the way it shifted its claws, lowered its head, and inhaled the heavy hot air of the cell. Each motion was a lesson in patience and observation, and the human studied it like a student learning from a strict but brilliant teacher. He had started to experiment, cautiously, with interactions. At first, he had only offered food, placing it on the floor and stepping back. But now, he began approaching the dragon more directly, offering water in a makeshift container he had found in the corner of the cell. The dragon sniffed at it carefully, its massive head tilting slightly, smoke curling from its nostrils. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it allowed him to place the water closer and closer. The human could feel a small but significant shift. The dragon was beginning to trust him, even in a small way. The human spoke softly as he worked, explaining things to himself, almost as if to teach the dragon the rhythm of his intentions. "I mean no harm," he said quietly. "I just want to survive. I just want to understand." The dragon's eyes flicked toward him, and though it did not respond with words or sounds, the human felt it listening. There was intelligence in those glowing eyes, a recognition of thought and purpose. It was not just a beast acting on instinct, it was considering him. It was learning him as he learned it. As hours passed, he noticed small signs that the dragon was beginning to recognize his presence. When he moved across the cell, the dragon no longer followed with a predatory focus. It watched, yes, but there was no immediate aggression. Sometimes it even moved aside slightly, giving him space rather than challenging it. The human realized that this was more than survival. It was the beginning of a connection, fragile but growing, between human and dragon. He began spending time observing its habits, its routines, its reactions to heat, light, and sound. The dragon had its patterns, predictable in some ways and unpredictable in others. It favored certain corners of the cell at certain times. It responded to the hum of the alien ship in specific ways, and it had subtle signs of mood, flicks of the tail, puffs of smoke, shifts in posture. The human memorized each detail not just for survival, but to communicate in the only way possible, through understanding and respect. One afternoon, While the dragon rested in a shaded corner of the cell, the human dared a small experiment. He extended his hand slowly, fingers outstretched, and placed it gently on one of the dragon's massive claws. The dragon froze, nostrils flaring, wings stiffening, but it did not strike. The human stayed still, letting his calm presence speak louder than any words could. Slowly, the dragon relaxed its stance, and for the first time, the human felt the incredible power of this creature without the overwhelming threat of death. The days passed, each blending into the next, and the human began to see patterns of behavior that the aliens clearly did not understand. The dragon was incredibly intelligent, capable of learning from observation, capable of remembering actions, and capable of recognizing intention. It was not just a weapon of destruction. It was a thinking, feeling creature, and the human realized that their survival depended on respecting that intelligence. Every careful step, every soft word, every gesture of non-threat mattered. Food and water remained scarce, controlled by the alien devices that dropped them into the cell at irregular intervals. The human rationed carefully, and every interaction with the dragon during these moments was an opportunity to strengthen trust. He began placing small portions near it, sometimes offering his own hand to guide the food closer. The dragon would sniff, pause, and then consume, all the while watching him, and the human noticed something remarkable. The dragon began to wait for him to step aside, almost acknowledging his presence as part of its routine. Isolation, which at first had felt suffocating, began to have a strange effect. He was forced to focus, to observe, to listen in ways he had never done before. Every noise, every shadow, every change in the air was important. He became attuned not just to the dragon, but to the environment of the alien ship itself. He learned the vibrations of the floor, the hum of the engines, the faint patterns of light, and even the subtle movements of the alien guards outside the cell. Everything was a piece of a puzzle that he needed to understand to survive. One day, as he sat in the corner, watching the dragon stretch and coil, he realized that their bond was growing in small but meaningful ways. The dragon allowed him to move closer during feeding times. It no longer attacked when he spoke softly. Sometimes it even appeared curious about his actions, tilting its massive head or sniffing in quiet contemplation. The human understood that this was a breakthrough. He was no longer simply surviving. He was communicating not with words but with intention, patience, and presence. He began speaking aloud more, not expecting the dragon to understand words, but trusting that tone and rhythm mattered. "I am not your enemy," he said softly, pacing slowly around the cell. "I will not harm you. I only want to live." The dragon's eyes followed him, nostrils flaring with curiosity rather than rage, and for the first time the human felt a flicker of something he had not experienced in the cell before. Respect. The dragon seemed to acknowledge his courage, his patience, and perhaps even his intelligence. The human also realized that the dragon had its own form of emotions. It displayed irritation when he moved too quickly or tried to force an interaction. It showed curiosity when he introduced new objects, food, or movements. It had a sense of awareness that was almost human, and the human learned to adapt, responding to these emotions with caution, empathy, and understanding. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was an active participant in a delicate, high-stakes relationship. By the end of the third week, the human had achieved a remarkable level of understanding. The dragon no longer reacted aggressively to his presence. It allowed him to move freely, to speak, and even to leave food and water close to it. There was still danger, of course. One wrong step could be fatal, but the fear that had gripped him initially had transformed into focused attention and mutual recognition. The human had learned that survival depended not on weapons, not on brute force, but on understanding, empathy, and respect for the other. He realized something else. The dragon was not just an obstacle. It was a teacher. It had shown him the limits of fear, the importance of patience, and the power of observation. Every twitch of a claw, every hiss of smoke, every flick of its wings was a lesson in survival and strategy. And the human had absorbed these lessons not just to survive, but to form a bond that could one day save both their lives. At night, as he rested against a cooler rock wall of the cell, he thought about the strange connection that was forming. The dragon's eyes glowed softly in the dim light, watching him even in rest, and the human realized that this was no longer just a fight for survival. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. Two beings, powerful in their own ways, learning to coexist, to understand each other, and perhaps even to trust one another. The human closed his eyes, exhausted but alert. He knew that the coming days would bring new challenges, that the aliens outside the cell were still watching, waiting for him to fail. But he also knew that he had something no other prisoner had: the beginnings of a bond with the deadliest dragon in the galaxy. And that bond, fragile as it was, might be the key to survival, escape, and even victory. For the first time since his capture, he felt a spark of hope. Not the naive hope of someone waiting for rescue, but the quiet, determined hope of someone who had learned to survive, to observe, and to connect with the most dangerous being he had ever faced. And in that hope he felt strength, the strength to endure, to learn, and to prepare for what would come next. By the fourth week in the dragon's cell, the human had settled into a careful rhythm. He moved, observed, and spoke with precision. He had learned the dragon's moods, its patterns, and its subtle ways of communicating without words. What had started as terror was now cautious respect and growing understanding. The dragon was no longer a mindless threat, but a creature of intelligence and power, capable of recognizing him as something different from the other prisoners who had never survived. That morning, the human noticed a change in the dragon's behavior. It was restless, pacing faster, nostrils flaring, wings flicking in rapid, tense movements. Something had stirred it, something in the air he could not see. He held his ground, breathing slowly, watching carefully. From the corner of the cell, he could see the faint shadow of the alien guards outside, moving with their weapons raised. The dragon's agitation seemed to mirror the tension outside. He realized this would be the first real test of everything he had learned. He could no longer simply observe. He had to act. He began speaking softly, in calm tones, letting the dragon hear the rhythm of his voice over the low rumble of its frustration. He moved slowly, hands visible, showing no threat. The dragon stopped pacing, lowering its head slightly, nostrils twitching as it sniffed the air. The human could feel its focus on him, measuring his intentions, deciding whether he was friend or foe. The alien guards opened the cell doors slightly, expecting chaos, expecting the dragon to attack immediately. But it did not. Instead, the dragon froze, listening, watching the human carefully. The human took a small step forward, then another, keeping his eyes on the dragon's eyes. He could feel the immense heat radiating from its body, the raw power coiled in its massive muscles, yet he did not flinch. He spoke softly again, words almost a whisper, guiding the creature with the sound of his voice. Slowly, the dragon began to shift its stance. Its claws dug into the floor, wings moving slightly, but it did not charge, did not roar, did not lash out. The human knew that one false move would end him instantly. He held out his hand, a gesture of calm, of peace, and the dragon sniffed it cautiously. Its massive head lowered closer and closer, and for a heartbeat it could have attacked. But it did not. It was listening. It was weighing his intent. And in that moment the human understood. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was a partner in survival, if only barely. And this was the ultimate test. The guards outside grew impatient. They began shouting orders, pressing their advantage, trying to provoke a reaction. The human froze, hands still raised slightly, body tense but controlled. He could feel the dragon's attention sharpening, sensing the outside threat, but he spoke calmly, soothingly, letting it know without words that he was not part of the danger. The dragon's tail flicked once, then twice, and it stepped aside just enough to create space between itself and the human. The human took another step, slow and deliberate, moving toward a corner of the cell where he could place his hand near the dragon's massive head. The dragon sniffed him again, nostrils flaring, smoke curling from its mouth, but it did not strike. For a tense moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The alien guards expecting violence, the dragon ready to strike, and the human standing still, relying entirely on his courage, his patience, and the fragile bond he had built over weeks. Then, without warning, the dragon moved its massive head closer, gently nudging the human's hand with its snout. Relief and disbelief flooded through him, but he did not move quickly. He stayed calm, letting the creature's motion guide him. Slowly, he patted its snout, speaking softly, letting it feel his intent. The dragon exhaled smoke, a deep, vibrating sound that seemed almost like acknowledgement. It was a small victory, but monumental. The human had passed the first real test of trust in the dragon's cell. The guards outside were stunned. They had never seen a human interact with the deadliest dragon without fear or attack. Some raised their weapons, uncertain whether to intervene. But the human and the dragon ignored them, moving in a delicate, synchronized rhythm born from days of careful observation, patience, and understanding. The dragon now allowed the human to approach it, to touch it lightly, and to guide small movements without aggression. The human realized that this was more than survival. It was communication, not through words but through presence, intention, and calm authority. The dragon was testing him, yes, but it was also beginning to trust him. And this trust, fragile as it was, had the power to change everything. He could feel the dragon's muscles relax slightly, the tail stopping its restless flicks, the wings lowering in a sign of acknowledgement. He had reached a level of understanding that few humans or aliens could imagine possible. Over the next hours, the human continued the careful dance. He spoke softly, moved slowly, and observed the dragon's every reaction. It was teaching him as much as he was teaching it. Each twitch of the tail, each flicker of smoke from its nostrils, each subtle movement of its wings was information. He learned to anticipate them, to adjust his behavior, and to maintain calm even in the presence of raw, unimaginable power. He began to notice other things, too. The dragon's eyes followed him with curiosity, not just caution. Its massive head tilted slightly when he approached from certain angles, and it seemed to recognize his patterns, predicting his next move. The human understood that this intelligence, this awareness, was the key to survival. Strength alone would not save him. Only understanding, respect, and the careful cultivation of trust could. The alien guards, frustrated by their lack of control, tried to provoke the dragon with noise and gestures. Lasers flared across the cell, sparks flying, and they shouted in harsh, guttural tones. But the human remained calm, positioning himself in ways the dragon could interpret as non-threatening. The dragon paused, watching him closely, then turned its attention back to him rather than attacking the outsiders. The human realized that he was becoming a mediator, a bridge between the dragon and the aliens, and the implications of that understanding were enormous. By evening, a new routine had emerged. The human could approach the dragon more confidently, feed it, and even touch it lightly without fear of retaliation. The dragon responded with subtle gestures of acknowledgement, lowering its head, soft huffs of smoke, a slow blink of the eyes. The human felt a profound sense of connection. He had learned that the deadliest creature the aliens possessed could be reasoned with, if not through words, then through courage, patience, and consistent demonstration of intent. This understanding gave him hope. He began planning in his mind, not just how to survive, but how to eventually escape. He knew that the alien guards were watching, and that one wrong move could cost him his life. But now, with the dragon's cautious trust, he had an ally unlike any other. The sheer size, strength, and intelligence of the dragon could be the key to breaking free from the alien stronghold. But first, he had to nurture the bond further, to ensure that the creature would follow him and protect him rather than act on instinct alone. Night fell, or the closest approximation of night within the alien ship, and the human sat beside the dragon, exhausted but alert. The dragon lay close, wings tucked, smoke curling lazily from its nostrils. It had allowed him proximity that would have been unthinkable at the start of his imprisonment. He placed a hand gently on its massive claw, feeling the heat and the raw power beneath his touch. And though there was still danger, he felt something extraordinary, a quiet partnership forming, a mutual recognition of intelligence and intent. He thought about the weeks he had survived so far, the fear, the observation, the careful steps that had earned him this small measure of trust, and he realized that this was more than survival. This was learning to see the world through another being's eyes, to communicate through gestures and intent rather than words or weapons. It was a skill that could save his life, not just now, but in ways he could not yet imagine. The human knew challenges lay ahead. The aliens outside would continue to test him. The dragon, though beginning to trust him, was still unpredictable. And yet he had passed the first true test, the demonstration of courage, calm, and mutual understanding in the presence of overwhelming power. He had survived where others had failed, and he had begun to forge a bond that might one day be the key to freedom. As he settled down for a brief rest, the human felt a flicker of hope stronger than he had felt in weeks. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was a participant in a delicate, dangerous, and extraordinary relationship with one of the most feared creatures in the universe. And in that relationship lay the potential to survive, to escape, and perhaps even to change the course of his story entirely. By the 5th week in the dragon's cell, the human had begun to feel a strange sense of control, not over the dragon, not fully, but over the situation itself. He had learned its habits, its moods, and its reactions, and in return the dragon had begun to allow him closer, tolerate his presence, and even respond to his calm words and gestures. What had once been fear was now a careful, calculated understanding, and he knew that this fragile trust would soon be put to the ultimate test. The alien guards outside had noticed the change too. They had expected chaos, the dragon lashing out and tearing him apart, but nothing had happened. Day after day they came to observe, confused, frustrated, and increasingly suspicious. "It should be dead," one of them had hissed in their harsh, guttural tongue. The others simply shook their heads, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. This was no ordinary human, and the dragon, powerful, deadly, and feared across galaxies, was responding to him with patience rather than fury. The human watched the guards carefully. He realized they were testing him, trying to provoke the dragon into attacking. He had seen it before. Lights flashing, loud noises, sudden movements meant to intimidate. But he had learned the dragon's signals, its responses, and he could anticipate its reactions. He knew which actions would trigger aggression, and which would keep it calm. He had become an interpreter, translating the unspoken language of strength, danger, and intent between the dragon and the aliens. That day, the aliens tried a new tactic. They opened the cell door wider than before and shouted commands, expecting the dragon to respond with violence. The human froze, heart pounding, but he did not flinch. He remained calm, hands visible, body steady, eyes locked on the dragon's. The dragon stiffened, nostrils flaring, wings lifting slightly, but it did not attack. Instead, it observed him, waiting for a signal, listening for intent. The human knew he had to act. He took a slow, careful step forward, then another, speaking softly, his voice calm and deliberate. "I am not your enemy," he whispered, repeating it again and again, not expecting the dragon to understand words, but trusting it could feel the meaning in his tone. The dragon's massive head tilted slightly, smoke curling from its nostrils. It inhaled sharply, assessing him, judging him, and then, in a gesture that surprised even him, it lowered its head closer, allowing the human to place a hand gently on its snout. The guards outside froze. They had never seen such control, never seen a human stand fearlessly before the deadliest creature in their empire. Some whispered in confusion. Others barked orders to provoke, but the dragon ignored them. It was listening, observing, and responding only to the human. And the human realized that in this moment, he had become more than a prisoner. He had become something unexpected, an equal in intelligence and patience, able to navigate the raw power of the dragon without fear. The human's mind raced with possibilities. If he could maintain this bond, he might survive. Not just survive, but gain an ally so powerful that no alien could stop him. He could sense the dragon's recognition, its cautious acceptance, and he knew he needed to nurture it carefully. One wrong move, one misstep, and all of this would collapse. But he felt confident now, more confident than he had ever been in the cell. He had studied the dragon, understood its instincts, and adapted his behavior accordingly. Over the next hours, he continued to interact with the dragon, feeding it, speaking softly, and carefully exploring the limits of their trust. The dragon allowed him closer than ever before. It nudged his hand with its snout in a gesture that seemed almost like acknowledgement. It shifted its massive body to accommodate him, a subtle but powerful sign of respect and recognition. The human realized that this bond, fragile as it was, had become a lifeline. He was no longer merely surviving. He was learning to influence and communicate with a creature that the aliens had deemed unstoppable. He also began to notice subtle signs of the dragon's emotions. There were moments of curiosity, when it would tilt its head and watch his movements intently. Moments of irritation, when it flicked its tail or shifted its wings sharply. And moments of calm when it settled nearby, smoke curling lazily from its nostrils, allowing him to sit within its enormous shadow without fear. The human understood these emotions now, as if he could read a language of muscle, scale, and heat. Each gesture carried meaning, and he responded with patience, caution, and consistency. As the day wore on, the human began testing the dragon's limits. He moved closer, touching its massive forearm carefully, then lightly brushing along its side. The dragon remained still, its hot breath washing over him, eyes fixed on him, assessing each movement. It was a dangerous game, One misstep could be fatal, but the human trusted his instincts and the bond they had slowly built. Each successful interaction reinforced the trust. Each moment of calm strengthened the fragile alliance between human and dragon. The aliens, increasingly frustrated, attempted another provocation. They fired a small energy pulse near the dragon's tail, expecting it to lash out. The dragon's body tensed, wings flaring, nostrils flaring smoke, but it did not attack. The human, standing carefully between the threat and the dragon, spoke softly, voice steady, and the creature relaxed slightly, lowering its wings, shifting its massive body to a calmer stance. The human had become a mediator, guiding the dragon's responses and keeping the situation from spiraling into chaos. It was then, as he stood there exhausted but alert, that he realized something extraordinary. The aliens had never faced a human like this. They had never seen someone who could remain calm, patient, and deliberate under extreme pressure, communicating through presence and action rather than weapons. And the dragon, recognizing his intent and courage, was responding not with instinct alone, but with intelligence and choice. Together they had created something unexpected, a partnership that defied fear, expectation, and danger. By evening, the human had achieved what no other prisoner had, a consistent, fragile understanding with the deadliest dragon in the galaxy. It allowed him to move freely within the cell, interact safely, and even initiate gestures of trust without immediate danger. He had learned its moods, respected its boundaries, and understood its patterns. And in return, the dragon had begun to acknowledge him as something more than prey, something worthy of recognition and cautious trust. The human sat near the dragon, exhausted, but exhilarated. He had survived not by strength, not by fear, not by brute force, but by intelligence, observation, and empathy. He had proven to the dragon that he was not a threat, and he had proven to himself that he could survive in the face of unimaginable danger. The alien guards outside could only watch, frustrated and bewildered, as their deadliest weapon failed to act against him. That night, the human rested against the cool wall of the cell, dragon close but calm, smoke curling from its nostrils in the dim red light. He reflected on everything that had happened, the fear, the observation, the careful steps that had earned him trust. And he realized that he was no longer just a prisoner. He was a participant in a delicate, dangerous, and extraordinary relationship, learning from the deadliest creature he had ever encountered. The human knew that the coming days would bring more challenges. The aliens outside were still testing him, still seeking to provoke the dragon into aggression. But now he had something no one else had, an understanding, a bond, and the beginnings of trust with the most feared creature in the universe. And he knew that this bond, fragile though it was, could be the key to survival, to escape, and perhaps even to turning the tables on his captors. As he closed his eyes, exhaustion tugging at him, he felt a spark of hope stronger than he had felt in weeks. He was no longer merely surviving. He was learning, adapting, and preparing for the challenges ahead. And in that preparation, he found strength. The strength to endure, to communicate, and to forge a bond with a creature that had been designed to be unstoppable, terrifying, and lethal. The human understood that this was only the beginning. The trust he had earned was fragile. The alien guards were still a threat, and the dragon, though patient now, was still capable of lethal action. But he had passed the test, proven his courage, and built the foundation for something extraordinary. And with that understanding, he fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, knowing that tomorrow, the next step would be even more critical, and the bond between human and dragon would be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. The human had survived weeks in the dragon's cell, learning, observing, and slowly earning the creature's trust. But he knew that the time for waiting was over. The alien guards had grown suspicious, more aggressive, and impatient. They expected him to fail, to provoke the dragon, to perish like every other prisoner before him. But he had a plan, one that depended entirely on the bond he had built with the deadliest dragon in the galaxy. Early in the morning, when the alien ship's engines hummed and the corridors outside the cell were quiet, the human began to move. He approached the dragon cautiously, speaking in calm, steady tones. "It's time," he whispered. The dragon lifted its massive head, nostrils flaring, smoke curling from its mouth. Its eyes met his, glowing with intelligence and recognition. In that moment, he knew they were ready. The bond had grown beyond fear and caution. It had become understanding, a silent agreement between human and dragon. He reached out, placing a hand gently on the dragon's massive snout. The dragon exhaled, slowly, a deep rumble vibrating through the cell, almost like acknowledgement. The human continued speaking softly, moving slowly along its side, guiding it toward the cell's exit. The dragon followed, wings tucked but ready, muscles coiled like springs. Together they approached the alien guards who stood outside, weapons raised and eyes wide with disbelief. The first guard shouted, pointing his weapon. But before he could act, the dragon exhaled a powerful gust of smoke and heat. It was not a full attack, not yet, but enough to force the guards to step back. The human remained calm, speaking softly, hands visible, guiding the dragon with gentle touches and quiet commands. The dragon understood him, not through words, but through intention, patience, and the careful trust they had built. The guards hesitated, unsure what to do. They had never seen a human control or even influence the deadliest creature in their empire. Some raised their weapons, others froze in fear. The human took advantage of their hesitation, signaling the dragon to move forward. With immense strength and precision, the dragon stepped aside, creating a path for the human to slip past. He moved quickly but carefully, never breaking the connection. The dragon's presence was both shield and weapon, a guardian of raw power that the aliens could not fully anticipate. As they moved through the corridors, alarms blared. The ship shook with the sudden realization that something had gone wrong. Alien soldiers scrambled, rushing toward them, but the dragon's immense size and speed created chaos. Doors were smashed aside, energy weapons fired, and the human ducked and ran alongside the massive creature. Each move was coordinated, instinctive, a combination of human strategy and dragon power. Together they were unstoppable. The human had memorized the layout of the cell and surrounding corridors. He knew where the traps were, where the guards might attempt to block them, and where the ship's engines could be accessed. He guided the dragon with careful gestures, pointing toward exits, slowing it when the path was dangerous and moving forward when speed was needed. The dragon, understanding his intent, followed without hesitation. Its massive wings created gusts of air that knocked aside barriers, while its claws struck with precision, not wasting energy or attention on unnecessary destruction. They reached a massive hangar, the kind where ships were docked and prepared for travel. The human knew this was their chance. He scanned the area, noticing an alien craft that could support their escape. The dragon sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, and the human spoke softly, reassuring it. The dragon lowered its head, allowing the human to climb onto its back. With a final rumble of acknowledgement, it leapt forward, powerful wings lifting them above the hangar floor. Aliens fired at them, energy beams streaking through the air, but the dragon moved with speed and precision. The human leaned forward, gripping scales and muscle, guiding their direction with subtle gestures. The hangar doors opened and they burst into open air, the alien planet sprawling below. The human had never seen the world from this height, the alien cities, the distant mountains, and the burning red sky. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel awe, knowing they were not just surviving, they were escaping. The dragon moved toward a less populated area, away from the alien patrols soaring above craters and rocky cliffs. The human watched the alien city below shrink into the distance, knowing that the guards who had expected his death would now face disbelief and chaos. He had survived, not through force alone, but through strategy, patience, and a bond that no one had imagined possible. Hours passed as they flew across the alien world. The human guided the dragon toward a secluded canyon, a place he had noticed during his observation from the cell's few vantage points. The dragon landed with incredible precision, wings folding slowly, tail coiling to stabilize. The human climbed down, exhausted but exhilarated. He had survived weeks of isolation, danger, and fear, and now, standing next to the massive creature that had once been his captor's deadliest weapon, he felt a sense of triumph unlike any other. They rested briefly, the dragon lying in the shadows of the canyon, smoke curling lazily from its nostrils. The human looked around, noting the terrain, the natural cover, and the paths that could lead them away from alien patrols. He spoke softly, to the dragon, voice calm, explaining what they needed to do next, not as commands but as guidance. The dragon's eyes followed him, glowing with intelligence and awareness, and it seemed to understand. They were partners now, not prisoner and beast, but two beings working together toward freedom. The journey was far from over. The alien empire would pursue them, deploy ships, and attempt to recapture both human and dragon. But the human had learned something crucial. Strategy, observation, and understanding could overcome even the deadliest force. And the dragon, loyal now in a way that only respect and shared experience could create, was the ultimate ally. Together, they could survive, navigate danger, and plan their next moves. Over the next days, they moved carefully through mountains, canyons, and forests, avoiding patrols, learning the land, and growing in trust. The human spoke softly at all times, keeping the dragon calm, offering food, and maintaining the fragile bond that had begun in the cell. He learned how to guide it without commands, how to anticipate reactions, and how to use its intelligence and strength without fear. The dragon, in turn, became more responsive, more aware of his presence, and even protective in ways that went beyond instinct. During one tense moment, an alien patrol spotted them near a canyon ridge. The human froze, whispering instructions to the dragon. It reacted immediately, moving with incredible speed and precision, using its massive wings to create gusts that knocked the patrols off balance without causing unnecessary harm. The human understood the dragon's instinct, guiding it with subtle gestures, and together they evaded capture. It was a demonstration of their perfect coordination, man and beast acting as one, intelligence and strength intertwined. As they moved farther from the alien stronghold, the human allowed himself a small smile. Weeks of fear, hunger, observation, and patience had led to this moment. The dragon, once a symbol of terror, had become a loyal ally, a protector, and a partner in survival. They had escaped the prison that no other human had survived, turning what had been a nightmare into an opportunity for freedom. That night they rested in a hidden canyon, the human leaning against the dragon's warm, scaled side. He spoke softly, recounting everything they had survived together, the lessons learned, and the bond forged. The dragon exhaled smoke slowly, a deep rumble vibrating through its body, and the human realized that this was more than trust. It was respect, mutual recognition, and even a hint of loyalty. They were no longer predator and prey, prisoner and captor. They were partners. The human knew that challenges remained. The alien empire would not forget, and they would pursue them. But now he had learned the most important lesson. Survival depended not on fear, not on brute force, but on understanding, observation, patience, and connection. And he had gained the ultimate ally, the deadliest dragon in the galaxy, not through weapons or domination, but through courage, respect, and the slow building of trust. As the stars emerged above the alien world, the human looked up, feeling a sense of accomplishment and hope he had never imagined possible. He had survived the impossible, formed a bond with the creature that had been designed to kill him, and together, they had escaped a fate that no other human had survived. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time, he felt ready. Not just to survive, but to thrive, guided by the bond he had nurtured and the courage he had discovered within himself. In that moment, sitting beside the massive dragon that now watched over him, he realized something extraordinary. True strength was not in domination or fear. It was in understanding, in patience, in courage, and in the ability to connect with another being, even one more powerful than oneself. And with that knowledge, he closed his eyes, confident that whatever came next, he would face it not alone, but as a team, human and dragon, united by trust, respect, and shared survival.